The Mosin-Nagant's bolt slides home with a metallic whisper. 40 meters below, German Obergefreiter Klaus Brenner adjusts his grip on his rifle. He does not know he has 17 seconds to live. The Soviet stormtrooper breathes out slowly. No wind. The crosshairs settle on the gap between Brenner's helmet and collar. The finger tightens. The rifle kicks. Brenner drops without a sound. His squad leader, crouched behind rubble that used to be someone's kitchen, never heard the shot. The acoustics of Stalingrad swallow everything. The city eats sound the same way it eats men. In the autumn of 1942, an entire German army had poured into this place, expecting a quick industrial conquest. What they found instead was a new kind of war, one for which no manual existed and no training had prepared them. A war fought, not across open fields or along predictable lines, but inside walls, beneath floors, through tunnels, and in the dark spaces where doctrine went to die. On January 4th, 1943, a piano sat in the center of Stalingrad's Red Square, pulled from the rubble of a blown-out house. Around it, hundreds of Soviet soldiers hunkered down in the ruins. A conservatory student named Kurt Honka played Beethoven's Appassionata, and not a single man coughed. Not a single man shifted his weight. The only sound was Beethoven echoing off shattered walls and the distant crack of sniper fire. These men knew silence. They had learned it the hard way. In the sewers, in the basements, in the spaces between heartbeats where they moved like ghosts through German positions. Silence was not simply the absence of noise for these men. It was a discipline, or a weapon, the most important tactical tool they possessed. 300 meters away, German Lieutenant Weiner scratched in his journal with numb fingers. "We are fighting devils that no flames or bullets can destroy." His handwriting was getting worse. The tremor in his hand would not stop. It was not the cold. He had been in Russia for 14 months. He had survived Barbarossa, the winter counteroffensives, the renewed German push south. He was experienced, hardened. He told himself he had seen everything war could produce. Stalingrad proved him wrong every single day. The piano music drifted across no man's land. Weiner looked up from his journal. His men huddled around a brazier made from a helmet. They had not spoken about the grain elevator, had not spoken about how the Soviet Third Company had simply disappeared. Or 1 minute, they were holding the south wall. The next minute, silence. No radio calls, no gunfire. Just empty positions and blood on the snow. The pathologist's report landed on Field Surgeon Miller's desk with a wet slap. He had been flown into the Stalingrad pocket to investigate sudden deaths. Not combat casualties. Just soldiers dropping dead in their positions. Young men, 19 and 20 years old. Healthy specimens from Bavaria and Prussia. The autopsy results made no sense. Every report read the same line. Subject exhibits cardiovascular degeneration consistent with a 70-year-old male. The soldier on his table had been 22, a farm boy from outside Munich. Now his heart sat in a specimen jar, shrunken to half its normal size. Stress and starvation. The combination was literally compressing their cardiovascular systems. The organs of young men were aging at 10 times the normal rate. They were dying from the inside out. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what was happening to the ones still alive. Muller watched veteran soldiers flinch at distant footsteps. He watched men who had stormed Sevastopol sit frozen, unable to respond to orders, eyes fixed on nothing. He wrote in his own notes a word he had not used since medical school: shell shock. But it was not artillery that had done this to them. It was the quiet. It was the specific, targeted uncertainty of never knowing where the next attack would come from, or when, or whether the man next to you had already been replaced by a Soviet, using his radio to call in your own reinforcements as an ambush. And fear of the known was manageable. Soldiers trained for it. Fear of the completely unpredictable was something else. It did not produce adrenaline and aggression. It produced a slow systemic collapse, organ by organ, nerve by nerve, until a 22-year-old farm boy from Munich had the cardiovascular system of a man 3 times his age. General Chuikov was unimpressed by his German opponents. He described German infantry as neither rapid nor resolute. Their armor was sluggish and indecisive. Coming from a man whose own forces were eating rats and using frozen corpses as building materials, this assessment carried real weight. The Germans fought by the book. Even in hell, they followed doctrine. They advanced behind armor support. They called for artillery preparation. They moved in formation. They clustered around their armor like children around their mother's skirts. When the armor got knocked out by the 1077th Anti-Aircraft Regiment girls with their low trajectory guns, the infantry fell apart. Chuikov's storm groups had evolved from pure desperation, small teams of 6 to 8 men who developed tactics born from necessity. They learned to move through buildings like ghosts. They discovered that a PPS H-41 submachine gun in a low corridor was worth more than a company of panzer grenadiers in the street. The 71-round drum magazine became the sound of Soviet urban warfare. 750 rounds per minute of full auto fire at ranges measured in meters. Not the elegant single shots of trained marksmen. Just overwhelming volume in confined spaces. German body armor stopped rifle rounds. It did not stop 47.6 2mm Tokarev rounds hitting the same target in 3 seconds. The physics of close-quarters fighting were brutally simple. You did not need accuracy. You needed presence. You needed to fill a room with fire before the enemy could process that you were there. The innovation did not come from headquarters. It came from survivors. Men who had watched their units get destroyed following conventional assault doctrine and had stopped asking permission before changing how they did things. They went into buildings through the back while headquarters was planning the frontal assault. They discovered that the fastest way through a building was never through a door. They found that German soldiers, trained for mobile warfare across open ground, Itarn became slower and more predictable the deeper you pushed them into confined spaces. Every meter you drove them into rubble worked against their strengths and for yours. Chuikov formalized what his survivors had already learned. He gave it a name, storm groups, and then he systematized the elimination of every German tactical advantage the city could strip away. The grain elevator stood like a concrete mountain in the industrial district, 40 meters tall, walls 2 meters thick, windows that provided perfect fields of fire in every direction. The Germans needed it for the riverbank position. The Soviets would not give it up. For 58 days, the battle raged inside that building. Neither side could fully control it. Neither side could walk away from it. The devils were 18 Soviet Marines and NKVD troops. Au end, 18 men held off entire German companies for nearly 2 months. They should not have been able to do it. Mathematics said it was impossible. Mathematics did not account for what the defenders had learned. They moved through the grain chutes like ventilation systems. They used the mechanical equipment as cover that could stop Panzerfaust rounds. They created firing positions in places German tactical doctrine said were impossible to defend. Most importantly, they had learned to be quiet. Completely, absolutely, murderously quiet. The German assault teams would breach a floor, sweep the rooms, declare them clear, then move to the next level. Behind them, Soviet defenders would emerge from grain chutes, elevator shafts, and machinery spaces. They would wait in absolute silence until German reserves moved through. Then they would open fire from behind. The structure itself became a weapon. Grain dust in confined spaces detonated like gunpowder when ignited. The defenders used it deliberately. Improvised explosives with no manufacturing required, just the environment itself turned against the attackers. A German Unteroffizier wrote to his wife, "We take the same rooms every day. Every night, the devils take them back. We never see them leave. We never see them return, but they are always there." Inside the building, the Soviet defenders were dying one by one. There was no medical evacuation. There was no resupply. There was no communication with the outside world beyond occasional signal fire. By week 3, 8 of the original 18 were dead. The survivors ate grain from the floor and drank water that seeped through the concrete. They slept in rotation, never more than 2 hours at a time, because silence required vigilance, and vigilance could not stop for sleep. The Germans were always somewhere in the building. The only question was which floor and how many and how long before they found you. The defenders had stopped thinking about survival as a concept. They thought only in the immediate, the next position, the next silence, the next ambush. Anything further ahead than the next 6 hours was a fantasy they could not afford. Major Hoffmann, commanding the German assault force, read the same contact report 3 times before he believed it. First platoon advanced to within 50 meters of the objective, encountered no visible defenders. Upon entering the ground floor, entire platoon eliminated by automatic weapons fire from unknown positions. No survivors. No survivors. That was becoming a common phrase in the daily reports. The thing that bothered Hoffmann was not the casualties. War meant casualties. It was the silence beforehand. Complete quiet, no movement, no muzzle flashes. Then suddenly, the building erupted with submachine gun fire from positions that should have been impossible to occupy. Hoffmann had dropped more ordnance on the grain elevator than some cities received in the entire war. The concrete structure should have been powder. Instead, it squatted on the riverbank like a malignant tumor, spitting fire at anything that moved. The grain elevator fell on November 20th. The final 18 defenders had become 3. No ammunition, no food, no water. They continued fighting with captured German weapons and improvised explosives made from grain dust. In German casualties for taking one building, over 400 killed and wounded. A Wehrmacht major reported to his division commander, "We are not fighting soldiers. Soldiers die when you kill them enough times. These are something else." Colonel Steiner spread the urban warfare manual across his desk like it might contain answers. His intelligence officer, Major Klein, entered with captured Soviet documents, tactical instructions written in pencil on scraps of paper. Klein translated haltingly. "Silent approach mandatory. PPSH 41, S only at point-blank range. No grenades until extraction." Steiner stared at the page. "They are using submachine guns for precision work." Klein continued. "Throat cuts preferred when ammunition conservation required. Body disposal through prepared routes only. Never leave evidence of entry method." Steiner felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was not combat doctrine. This was assassination protocol. The Soviets had turned urban warfare into systematic murder. His Panzer IV commander, Hauptmann Weber, had already pulled his armor back from the industrial district before Steiner could order him to do it. After losing 7 panzers in a single afternoon to Soviet troops who appeared from building foundations, the crews had simply refused to continue. Weber could not blame them. He had watched, through his periscope, as a full company of infantry advanced through a street his tanks were supposed to be covering. The infantry disappeared into a building. None of them came back out. There was no firefight, no explosion, no sound at all. 40 men just gone. The armors that had conquered Poland and France and most of Russia had found the one environment where its advantages meant nothing. The classified Soviet tactical manual from December 1942 never left Stalingrad. Silent clearing doctrine, storm groups of 6 men, 2 PPSH-41 gunners, 2 riflemen with captured German weapons, 1 sapper with explosives, 1 scout with a knife, no radio, no supporting weapons, no backup plan. The scout went first, always the scout. German sentries disappeared without sound. Throat cuts were quiet if you did them right. The Soviets had learned to do them right. A proper cut severed the windpipe and carotid arteries simultaneously. Death in 8 to 12 seconds. No scream, no struggle, no alert. The sapper created entry points that did not exist on any German defensive plan. Fought basement walls blown from inside adjacent buildings. Floor charges that created man-sized holes between levels. Explosive entry through walls the Germans thought were structurally impossible to breach. The PPSH gunners provided overwhelming firepower in confined spaces. 750 rounds per minute meant a 2-second burst put 25 bullets into a room. At basement ranges, accuracy was irrelevant. Volume of fire was everything. The doctrine was based on one principle: appear inside enemy positions without warning. German defensive positions were designed to stop attacks from predictable directions: front doors, windows, stairways. The storm groups came from everywhere else. And when the killing was done, the sanitization was as rigorous as the assault itself. Bodies moved through prepared routes, shell casings collected, entry points concealed, blood covered with snow or rubble. The goal was to make German positions simply cease to report in, not to leave evidence of attack, not to trigger a response, just to make men vanish from the map the way smoke vanishes when the wind changes. German commanders then faced an impossible intelligence problem. Were those positions overrun or simply experiencing radio failure? Were their men dead or out of contact? The uncertainty was itself a weapon. Every time Paulus committed reserves to investigate a silent sector, he weakened his response to every other sector. The storm groups were not just killing Germans, they were destroying the command structure's ability to understand what was happening to it. And Senior Sergeant Petrov had been moving through the underground city for 4 hours without making a sound. His engineer had memorized the blueprints of every major structure in their operational area. Not just the buildings themselves, but the original utility plans. Gas lines, water pipes, electrical conduits. The infrastructure of a city built for peacetime use that now formed an invisible road network through the ruins. Soviet engineers had spent months before the siege deepening those connections, blowing passages between adjacent basement walls, widening sewer junctions to allow armed men to pass in single file, creating a second Stalingrad beneath the one the Germans thought they were fighting over. Moving through it required a specific mental discipline. In the sewers, the ceiling was sometimes low enough that a man had to crawl with his weapon cradled against his chest. The water was cold enough to cause muscle cramps after 20 minutes. The smell was something that did not leave you. And above all, you moved in complete darkness, navigating by touch and by the engineer's whispered count of meters and turns. 3 left after the junction, 40 meters straight, duck at the low pipe. The men who could not master the darkness washed out of storm group training in the first week. The men who remained had learned to find it calming. Down here, nobody shot at you. Down here, the war was on pause. The killing happened above. Down here, there was only the count of meters and the sound of your own controlled breathing in the dark. Above Petrov's team, German voices echoed through blown-out buildings. His radio crackled with whispered coordinates. Building 47, second floor, 8 Germans, machine gun position facing west. They emerged in the basement through a concealed entrance behind stacked rubble. No guards. Petrov's team moved up narrow service stairs designed for maintenance workers. They knew this structure better than its German occupants. Second floor, German voices directly overhead. Through a gap in the ceiling created by artillery damage, Petrov observed the position. 8 men around an MG-42 machine gun. Professional setup, good fields of fire. Ammunition stockpiled. Radio operator maintaining contact with the headquarters. Professional soldiers doing professional work. They had no idea 6 Soviet submachine gunners were 12 feet below them. Satchel charges placed on support beams. Timed fuses, 30 seconds. Petrov's team moved to predetermined positions. The charges detonated simultaneously. The floor collapsed. German soldiers tumbled into the basement in an avalanche of concrete and wood. Before they could react, 6 PPS H-41s opened fire at point-blank range, 71 rounds per weapon, 426 bullets in 3 seconds. The silence afterward was absolute. Building 47 cleared, no survivors, moving to next objective. They exited through the same tunnel they had entered. When German relief forces arrived, they found only blood and empty equipment. No bodies. The forbidden method required complete sanitization. The Soviet loudspeakers started broadcasting on November 19th. The message was simple and repeated every 2 minutes. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies in Russia. And Stalingrad is a mass grave. Then came the sound of ticking, like a metronome. Tick, tick, tick. 7 seconds. Tick, tick, tick. 7 seconds. Another comrade dead. The psychological effect was measurable. German radio intercepts showed increasing reports of nervous exhaustion among frontline units. Requests for medical evacuation doubled. Friendly fire incidents increased by 300%. General Paulus developed an uncontrollable eye tic. He tried to disguise it by wearing dark glasses indoors. His staff pretended not to notice when he blinked rapidly for minutes at a time during briefings. General Chuikov suffered from severe eczema that required his hands to be bandaged constantly. The stress manifested differently in each man, but the result was the same. Command effectiveness degraded under psychological pressure that never stopped. The method spread through Chuikov's 62nd Army like a virus. By December, entire German companies would abandon positions at the first sound of PPSH fire, even when that fire was coming from their own captured weapons. Storm groups would strike multiple buildings simultaneously. German reserves could not determine which attacks were feints and which were the main effort. They would commit reinforcements to one crisis, only to have 3 more appear in different locations. Soviet snipers would wound German soldiers in non-fatal areas, then wait for rescue attempts. Medical personnel became priority targets. The wounded would lie in no man's land calling for help that could not come. German units started leaving their wounded rather than risk rescue missions. Morale collapsed when soldiers realized their own survival depended on abandoning their comrades. The ticking broadcast from Soviet positions became Pavlovian conditioning. German soldiers would freeze when they heard any rhythmic noise at all. Storm groups learned to use captured German medical supplies to treat their own wounded while denying the same supplies to enemy casualties. The psychological message was clear: your equipment, your supplies, your tactical doctrine, your comrades. All of it belongs to us now. General Paulus stared at the loudspeaker mounted on a broken wall. The voice was female, cultured Russian accent, perfect German pronunciation. She spoke like a university professor delivering a lecture to particularly slow students. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies in Russia. Stalingrad, mass grave. Tick. Tock. Our tick tock. His aide, Major Eisenhut, shifted nervously. Sir, perhaps we should relocate the command post. Paulus knew better. The loudspeakers were everywhere, mounted on buildings the Soviets still controlled, hidden in ruins throughout the pocket. There was no escape from the voice. He watched his staff deteriorate over the past month. Sleep deprivation, nervous tics, uncontrollable tremors. Major Klein now bandaged his hands to stop them from bleeding. He scratched at his skin whenever the loudspeakers began. Sir, Eisenhut held up a casualty report. Daily losses have increased 30% this week. But not from combat, from something else. Entire units reporting enemy contact, then falling silent. Relief forces finding positions abandoned. Equipment intact. Personal effects undisturbed. The men had simply vanished. Michar. Lieutenant Wayner's pencil broke against frozen paper. He had been trying to write the same sentence for an hour. The street is no longer measured by meters, but by corpses. His position overlooked what used to be Solinka Street. Now it was a corridor of rubble and frozen meat. German bodies marked distance better than survey stakes. 20 meters to the burned-out pharmacy, 50 meters to the collapsed apartment building, 80 meters to whatever remained of the textile factory. But the street kept getting shorter. Every morning, Weiner counted the bodies. Every evening, there were fewer, not because of burial details, because the front line moved backward. German corpses that marked the forward edge yesterday were in Soviet territory today. His radio crackled. Able Company, you investigate Charlie Company's silence. Weiner checked his ammunition. 18 rounds for his Kar 98K. 2 stick grenades. Enough for a firefight. Not enough for whatever had been happening to the other units. They moved through connecting trenches toward Charlie Company's position. Fresh snow covered everything. No footprints, no blood trails, no shell craters. Charlie Company's trenches were empty, not abandoned, empty. Equipment in proper position, weapons clean and loaded, personal effects undisturbed, hot coffee still steaming in metal cups, but no soldiers. Obergefreiter Kunze examined the machine gun position. Sir, the MG-42 is loaded and ready, safety off. Someone was here minutes ago. Weiner studied the setup. Perfect fields of fire. Good ammunition supply. Whoever had been here had every advantage. Professional soldiers in a strong position. And they had simply ceased to exist. His radio operator tried Charlie Company's frequency. Static, then something else. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing, like someone listening. Charlie Company, this is Able Company. Report your status. The breathing stopped. A voice answered in perfect German. Able Company, this is Charlie Company. Position secure. No enemy contact. Weiner recognized the voice. Hauptmann Bieber, Charlie Company commander. Distinctive Bavarian speech pattern. Weber had died last week. They had buried him in the company cemetery. Charlie Company, what is your current strength? Full strength, Able Company. All present and accounted for. Weiner looked around the empty trenches. Hot coffee, warm weapons, fresh footprints in the snow leading away from the position. But no soldiers. Charlie Company, we are at your position. You are not here. The radio went silent, then laughter. Soft laughter that might have been Weber or might have been something else entirely. Able Company, where else would we be? Kunze dropped his rifle. The sound echoed across the empty position like a gunshot. In the sudden quiet, they heard it. Footsteps in the snow. Getting closer. But they saw nothing. Weiner's radio operator was already transmitting. Battalion, Able Company. We are at Charlie Company's position. Position is empty. No enemy visible. No evidence of combat. Request immediate guidance. Static. Then a voice that was not battalion. Calm. Unhurried. German with a slight Eastern inflection. Able Company. This is battalion. Return to your position. Charlie Company is secure. Weiner, report your own status. Weiner looked at his radio operator. His radio operator looked at Weiner. The voice had said the right words in the right order. Battalion call sign. Correct authentication. Proper procedure. And it was not battalion. Weiner had spoken to the battalion commander every day for 4 months. He knew the man's voice the way he knew his own father's. This was not that voice. Someone else was using battalion's frequency, using it correctly, using it to send Able Company back to their position alone and in the dark. He keyed the handset. He said nothing. He switched off the radio. His men stood in the empty trench looking at each other. 18 rounds for his Kar 98K. 2 stick grenades. The footsteps in the snow had stopped. Wherever they had come from, they were gone now. Or they had stopped moving and were simply waiting. Weiner looked at the hot coffee in the tin cups. He looked at the loaded MG-42 pointing at nothing. He thought about the sound of no sound and what it meant when Stalingrad went quiet. The final storm group assault on German positions in the factory district began at 0347 hours. No artillery preparation, no signal flares, no coordinated advance, just silence until the killing started. 2 companies of Wehrmacht infantry in a reinforced position with interlocking fields of fire. Machine gun nests covering all approaches. Anti-tank guns positioned to deny armor support. A conventional assault would have cost a battalion to take it. The Soviets committed 18 men. Storm Group Volkov approached through the sewer system. Storm Group Petrov used basement tunnels. Storm Group Kozlov came through buildings the Germans thought were in friendly hands. The German sentries died at exactly 3:47, synchronized from 3 different directions simultaneously. The machine gun crews died at 0348. PPSH-41 burst from ranges where German automatic weapons could not traverse fast enough to acquire targets. The anti-tank. Gun teams died at 0349. Grenades rolled into positions from basement access points that were not supposed to exist. The surviving German infantry called for reinforcements at 350. They reported enemy contact from impossible positions and requested immediate artillery support on their own location. The artillery never came. German commanders could not approve fire missions on positions they believed contained friendly forces. By 400 hours, the strong point was silent. German radio operators tried to raise the defenders for 6 hours. The radios still worked. The Germans were just dead. The relief force investigation found basement access tunnels, sewer connections, and blown wall passages invisible to German reconnaissance. Storm Group Volkov lost 1 man. Storm Group Petrov lost none. Storm Group Kozlov lost 2 to German return fire. Total Soviet casualties, 3 wounded, none killed. Total German casualties, 147 dead. Silent clearing doctrine had achieved a 49 to 1 kill ratio. Hitler's voice crackled through the radio receiver like a prayer from another world. You can be certain no one will get us away from there. The words echoed in Paulus's bunker with the authority of divine commandment. 20 feet underground, and surrounded by 2 meters of reinforced concrete, the 6th Army commander listened to his death sentence. Berlin demanded situation reports. Army Group Dön promised relief operations. Luftwaffe headquarters scheduled supply drops. Everyone talked about Stalingrad like it was a temporary setback. Paulus knew better. The pocket shrank daily, not from Soviet attacks, from something quieter. German units simply stopped existing. Radio contact ended. Relief forces found empty positions. The perimeter contracted like a noose drawn tight by invisible hands. "Sir," Eisenhut read from the daily casualty report, "we have lost contact with sectors 7, 12, and 15. Lost contact." The euphemism covered a multitude of impossibilities. Units that vanished without firing a shot. Strong points that appeared abandoned but showed no signs of combat. Soldiers who disappeared from positions that remained tactically intact. The storm groups. The forbidden method. Silent clearing operations that left no trace except empty uniforms and bloodstains that froze before dawn. The numbers stopped adding up in ways that could be explained to Berlin. Paulus had units reporting full strength that had not transmitted in 48 hours. He had sectors showing green on the map that relief forces found empty when they arrived. He had a chief of staff who had developed a stutter so severe he could no longer deliver verbal briefings. He had an intelligence officer whose hands shook badly enough that his written reports were becoming illegible. He had himself, signing documents with a left hand he could not fully control, the eye-tick syncing perfectly to a loudspeaker broadcast that never stopped. 7 seconds, 7 seconds, 7 seconds. The entire Sixth Army was dying not from bullets, but from the accumulated weight of not knowing what was coming next, and from where and when. Paulus drafted his final message to Berlin. The words came slowly. "May our sacrifice serve as an eternal example to never surrender." He was lying. They had surrendered weeks ago, not to the Red Army, to something else, to the realization that conventional warfare had rules and those rules no longer applied. Outside, the loudspeakers continued their countdown. Every 7 seconds. Every 7 seconds, another German died. Tick, tock. Tick, tock. The sound had become his heartbeat. His pulse matched the rhythm now. 7 seconds between beats. His body synchronizing with its own death announcement. Major Eisenhut approached with the surrender document. Official language. Diplomatic phrasing. Terms and conditions for ending the siege. Paulus signed without reading it. The techniques disappeared into classified files after the war. Soviet doctrine returned to conventional methods after the city fell. The storm group innovations were deemed unsuitable for regular forces and incompatible with established military protocol. The lessons were too brutal to acknowledge. No army wanted to train soldiers to fight like devils. No doctrine could officially endorse tactics that turned men into ghosts who killed from positions that should not exist. Army bureaucracies are built around predictability, around training manuals that can be printed and distributed, and around tactics that can be taught in 6 weeks to conscripts who have never held a rifle. The forbidden method required something that could not be taught in 6 weeks. It required men who had learned to think of buildings not as structures, but as organisms. Men who had internalized 3-dimensional space until they could navigate it in complete darkness. Men who had made peace with a kind of warfare that erased the line between soldier and assassin. Every army that encountered those lessons decided the same thing. Too difficult, too costly, too psychologically damaging to the men who practiced it. Easier to pretend Stalingrad was an anomaly than to accept what it actually demonstrated about the nature of cities as battlefields. But the knowledge survived, in whispered conversations between veterans, like in tactical innovations that appeared briefly in later conflicts and disappeared again when commanders realized what they were seeing. In basement tunnels beneath Grozny, in sewer systems under Mosul, in the spaces between official doctrine and necessary reality. The storm groups had solved the fundamental problem of urban warfare: how to attack prepared positions without becoming casualties yourself. The solution required fighting like the city itself was a weapon. Buildings were not obstacles, they were networks for maneuver. Sewers were not waste systems, they were highways. Basements were not shelters, they were fighting positions that connected every structure in the city. Stalingrad taught that silence was deadlier than firepower. Noise was information. Every sound a soldier made told the enemy his position, his direction, his number, his weapon. The German army had been trained to project force through volume, suppressive fire, coordinated advances announced by artillery. The doctrine assumed that overwhelming noise would paralyze the enemy. In Stalingrad, that doctrine became a targeting system. Every German who made noise died faster than every German who stayed quiet. The storm groups made no noise at all, and they killed in ratios that had no precedent in the history of urban combat. There is a version of this story where the lessons of Stalingrad changed everything, where armies rebuilt their doctrine from the ground up, trained soldiers to think in 3 dimensions, acknowledged that a city is not a battlefield with buildings on it, but a battlefield made of buildings, and prepared accordingly. That version did not happen. The armies that came after chose the comfortable lie instead. Stalingrad was special. Stalingrad was a product of extreme conditions. Stalingrad could not be repeated and therefore did not need to be studied. The doctrine that failed in Stalingrad remained the doctrine for the next generation of urban warfare, and the generation after that. The last storm group veteran died in 1987. He took the real manual with him. Kurt Honka survived the war. He never played piano again. Some sounds, he said, were too beautiful for men who had learned to kill in silence. He had sat in Stalingrad's Red Square and played Beethoven, while men around him breathed in the controlled discipline of people who had learned that noise was death. He had heard the music drift across no man's land toward German positions, and understood that on the other side, men were listening despite themselves, because beauty does not stop working just because you are at war. And then the silence had come back, the way it always came back in Stalingrad, and whatever brief human moment the music had created was gone again, replaced by the particular quiet that meant the storm groups were moving. General Paulus's radio crackled one final time, Moscow's voice, calm and professional. German command, this is Soviet command. Stalingrad is concluded. Your forces no longer exist. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Paulus heard it, the sound that had been driving him mad for months. Nothing, absolute nothing. The sound of no sound. The storm groups had won. The street is still measured by corpses. We just do not talk about how they got there.